All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Adam Hart. I'm a curator and archivist at the nonprofit Media Burn Archive based in Chicago. We collect, produce, and distribute documentary and experimental video created by artists, activists, and community groups. Our mission is to use archival media to deepen context and encourage critical thought through a social justice lens. This event is part of an ongoing free series called Virtual Talks with Video Activists, which brings together media producers, scholars, and viewers to discuss the art and politics of video and of documentary. After tonight, we'll be taking a short break from the series, but we'll be back later in the summer and the fall with more screenings and conversations. Tonight, we're thrilled to welcome film and video maker William Farley for a screening and discussion of a portion of his work in progress, I Wanted to Be a Man with a Gun, 3 American Soldiers in World War II. He will be in conversation with scholar and curator Bruce Jenkins. Before we begin, we ask that you all remain muted during the screening so that everyone can hear clearly. When it's time for the Q&A, you can feel free to put your questions in the chat, which I'll be monitoring. You're also welcome to ask questions out loud as well. And if you'd like to do that, you can virtually raise your hand to be called on. If you want to raise your hand, look for the reactions button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, click it, and some options will pop up, including one to raise your hand. If you have trouble finding this feature, you can always write in the chat that you'd like to be called on. This event is being live captioned. There are 2 ways of viewing the captions, as subtitles on the bottom of the screen or in a live transcript window that will open up separately. To turn the captions on or off, or to switch between the subtitle and live transcript, look for the live transcript button at the bottom of the screen and click the arrow on the top right. If you enjoy the event tonight and want to share it with others, the event is being recorded and will be posted online within a few days. We will send you an email when the recording is available. I'll return after the screening to reintroduce William and Bruce, but for the moment, I do want to point everyone to farleyfilm.com, where you can find updates about I Wanted to Be a Man with a Gun and contribute to the project's completion funds, as well as find out about William's other projects. So, brief biographies of our participants tonight. So instead of revising William's own bio to be in the third person or to write my own version, I'd prefer to use his own words. So I will quote, I was in the MFA program at California College of the Arts as a sculpture major, and I took an elective class on the history of cinema. At the end of the semester, the professor offered us a choice, either write a paper about the films he had shown or make a film. I knew nothing about making a film, but I was innocent and ambitious and decided to give it a try. The film was accepted at a local film festival, and standing in the back of the theater watching it play, feeling the enthusiasm from the audience swept me away. For the next half century, I made experimental films, documentaries, and feature-length narrative movies. I took on the liberties of being an artist and used film as the medium to investigate the world. I am inspired by a wide variety of subject matter, whatever captures my imagination and fuels my sense of story. I have lived a life of abandon. That is just, end quote. That is just brackets, the main reason why I wanted to quote William himself, I have lived a life of abandon. Okay, back to the quote in brackets. And I've been fortunate enough to have my film shown nationally and internationally. The list of venues includes the Whitney, the San Francisco MoMA, the Walker, Sundance, the New York Film Festival, and many more. My work has received awards at the Mannheim International Film Festival, the Chicago Film Festival, the Ann Arbor Film Festival, among others. My films have also been broadcast on public television in the US and abroad, reaching thousands of viewers. I am blessed to be able to do this work. And our moderator, Bruce Jenkins, is a professor of film, video, new media, and animation at the School of the Arts Institute of Chicago. He gained an interest in film while rewinding, cleaning, and strapping film into shipping cases at the documentary distribution company Icarus Films. He began his curatorial career in the 70s with small-scale shows at Media Study Buffalo and the Albright Knox Art Gallery. In 2021, Jenkins published the second volume of the Andy Warhol film catalog raisonné for the Whitney and Yale University Press. His research focused on the film and video works produced by Warhol from 1963 to 65. This took the form of essays examining Warhol's influences, methodologies, source materials, technical innovations, and engagement with the subjects that he filmed. In addition to SAIC, Jenkins has taught at Harvard, Cincinnati, Macalester, University of Minnesota, and SUNY Buffalo. He has served as the Stanley Cavell Curator at the Harvard Film Archive, Director of Film and Video at the Walker, and Film Programmer at Media Study in Buffalo. His publications include Gordon Matta Clark, Conical Intersect, On the Camera Arts and Consecutive Matters, The Writings of Hollis Frampton, and 2000 BC, The Bruce Connors Story, Part 2. He's authored numerous articles for publications such as Art Forum, Millennium Film Journal, and October. So we will all be back after the screening for conversation. The screening will be about 25 minutes. And once again, if you could please keep yourself on mute so that everyone can hear clearly. All right. And Dan, if you could play whenever you are ready.
I was stuck with the romance of war. Everyone is, every boy is, or not every boy. And why that happens, it has to do with our competitiveness, dreams of revenge that are fostered by stories of war. This country has its founding myths, war stories, and it's bred in us by our schooling. Recover in detail what I'd gone through, I think it would make me tremble.
I would certainly call it the most intense. I wouldn't attribute a satisfaction to that.
That was an amazing experience for a young man. You want me to tell you about it?
When I was in basic training, I noticed that the officers kept looking at me, and I was like a sad sack. My clothes were too big for me. And I was trying desperately to conform. And I thought that they were deciding whether to keep me in the service or send me home.
Basic training, as I recall it, was extremely unpleasant. And not because the subjects were too difficult or the physical demands on me were excessive, but I wasn't getting along too well with some of the other guys. They were bigots, many of them, and it was a difficult time.
There was a rampant anti-Semitism in the Army. There was no question about it. And so I decided, when your dog tags, you have your religion. I said, I don't want it on there. I'm just gonna leave that blank. So they never knew. There was a Jewish kid from the Bronx, Evan Stein. I'll never forget this guy. And it was time for mail call. The mail sergeant says, "This is for the Jew." And the sergeant dropped it into the mud. So we had a fight. He was bigger than I am, but I was so incensed that I broke his arm and one other thing. He had to go to the hospital like that time I was through with him. 2 weeks, and it was a rough seas.
Partway there, we're already seasick, and just feeling that we were going to die from the weather, not from combat.
I took a top bunk because I know everybody would be vomiting all over the place. And so I vomited too, but at least it wasn't falling on me. We immediately went into combat. All green. We'd never shot at anybody other than targets in our life. And all of a sudden we look up and there's a German motorcyclist. I said, my God, my first German. So I picked up my carbine and I aimed right at him and I shot him. And everybody looked at me, oh. This is our first taste of combat.
I heard the call for a medic because someone was hurt. And I ran over to the slit trench that had caved in. And it caved in on top of this soldier. And I pulled him out. We had to dig him out, actually. And he wasn't breathing. And so I applied some breathing techniques, which we wouldn't do now. They're not really effective. But he died.
The Normandy invasion was the 6th of June, and I have never been able to remember what happened. Maybe it was better that I didn't remember. In the beginning, we were afraid of them because they had such a great reputation, being fearless. It was very slow. Trying to go from one hedgerow to another was deadly because the Germans were just sitting there waiting for us. I thought to myself, I'm a sergeant. I got 14 guys that are depending on me, and I'm scared to death. I really should not have been a sergeant. It was always hard to admit that I was scared. I got in a foxhole and didn't want my guys to hear me crying, but I was crying. I thought I was going to die.
There were some German units who had 88s. That was their main artillery piece. And we stood behind a hill. I was with my driver, and he's standing up there, you dirty bastards, and he's waving and he's shooting. And I said to him, Sergio drop down. There's still a chance you can get shot. Nah, I'll show those Nazi bastards. And so he got up and he took his 45 and he went bang, and he shot in their direction. And the strangest thing happened. The 88 shell went right through him. He was right alongside me. I could look through him and see there was nothing there to see.
During that time, we mounted a counterattack with a Tiger tank. It was a frightening scene to see that thing come up over the hedgerow. I had 2 guys in my squad who were trained to be bazooka firers. So I was screaming at them to fire, and they were petrified. They couldn't move. So I jumped in. I fired, and it hit the track, broke off the track, and the thing just kept spinning, and everybody was firing at the tank. That was the end of that Tiger tank.
Everyone charged, except me. I was frozen to the ground and just couldn't move. An automatic mortar started going right down the line of the platoon. I then stopped freezing and ran out into the open to pull out a guy who had been hit. He was a big fellow. He must have weighed a couple 100 pounds. I started pulling him back of the barbed wire that we had breached. But at that point, I had no fear. You just became numb. You do what you are trained to do. It's when it's over or there's an interlude that the dread catches up with you. And it could be dreadful.
Jungle, kill or be killed. There are no half measures, no alibi runs. You've got to twist your instincts inside out to play this game, because it's played to win, anyway. The goal is destruction, pure and simple. Your mind must be tuned to a new pitch, to go after your enemy all out. No holds barred, to hurt, to cripple, to kill. This is war. If your instinct says give him a decent chance, remember he wouldn't give you one. The rules of a lifetime may whisper you can't get a man when his back's turned. But you're deaf to the rules because in war, there are no rules.
We were being held up by these 2 kids who were sniping at us. And so I said, Captain, let me go around. There's a burned out tank, and I'll see if I can get a shot at him. The company commander, his name was Weir, he says, they're just kids, come on. So he walked out. One of the kids raised his rifle and bang, and hit him right in the head, and goodbye, Captain Weir. So I killed him. I killed the two kids that killed Captain Weir.
We were asked to undergo a procedure called marching fire. We kept on firing and marching. So it was a procedure where you gradually came across the enemy, crouched in his holes, fearing to look up, and then they were like sitting ducks, and then they got shot. It was, of course, an extremely risky procedure, in the course of which some of my close friends were killed. Someone I lost was my dearest friend, Sergeant Salerno.
I lost some good friends. Lieutenant Max Scholes, and a mortar shell hit him and blew out his chest. And he was still alive. He was still alive and breathing, but his lungs were puffing out. And I pulled him into a corner where there was a wall. And he said, "Goodbye, Harold," and he died. Yeah. He was a nice guy. There were some sons of bitches, but he was a nice guy. When he died, I cried because he was a fine man and a good officer and a friend. So, yes, I covered him up completely. I took a raincoat or what they call a shelter half, which was half of a tent, and I covered him up, and I patted it, and I patted his forehead, and I kissed him.
It was scary because we never knew if we were going to throw our grenades into a vacant room or they were going to throw theirs into ours. If we didn't do something first before the Germans did, they would do it to us. I don't remember much about house-to-house combat. I don't know why. I can't think of any story to tell about that.
There were some SS troopers, and someone in the town says, "They're in that house there." So the lieutenant says, "Sergeant, go in there and get them." So I went in the house, and it was dark. There was no light any place. And I got to one room, and there was a big cupboard, but it was full of clothes. It was hard to tell. So I put my bayonet on my rifle, and I started poking around. And I poked, and I poked, and I poked, and I thought I heard something, but I wasn't sure. And I said, well, I came out, and the lieutenant said, well, did you find them? I said, I'm not sure. So he looks at my bayonet. He says, you found them all right. It was covered with blood and viscera. So I killed him. I don't know if he survived, but I kept on just sticking my bayonet in and in and in and in.
You're often eating among dead Germans, and sometimes very close to dead Americans. You were seeing bodies split open and brains exposed.
I remember sitting on a German eating a can of sea rations. And afterwards wondering, why did I do that?
We were stopped to have some lunch, and there were some Germans in the woods, and they were sniping at us. And one of them was very bold, and he came out, and I shot him. And he lay down on the road, but then they ran away. And so I looked at him, and he was full paraphernalia. He was an officer, as a matter of fact. So, well, I want to sit. I said, I don't want to sit on the ground. So I sat on him and ate my lunch. There was a German pilot whose plane crashed, and he survived. Typical, arrogant, disdainful. This guy was looking for a place to run away and escape, and I knew it. So I said, I'm going to get him. And so I stopped once, ostensibly to take a piss, and he saw his chance, and he ran away. And so I leveled my carbine, and I shot him right in the back.
I was going to tell you something. When Germans would surrender, I had two different guys that I would use to take them back to headquarters. If I wanted to make sure that the guys survive, I would call on one guy to take them back. And if it was a stormtrooper who was surrendering and was arrogant, I had a guy in my squad who was really a criminal. I would use the guy to take him back, knowing that in a few minutes I would hear rifle shots, and that he would come back and say he tried to escape.
We captured two German prisoners, and one of the soldiers marched him into the woods. And they didn't shoot him, they clubbed him to death.
I was in headquarters, and one of the guys came in, and he says, you ought to see what the Jew boy is doing. He had taken two young German, they were about 16, 17 years old, and he had tied them to a post. And he systematically shot them from the ankles to the knees, to the hips, and then finally to the head. He killed them. There was complete silence while they never tried to stop him. He gained new respect that he was able to kill people.
Unarmed and defenseless American prisoners, comrades of these men, fell to the machine guns of our enemies.
The Malmedy massacre when the Germans lined up 70 or 80 GIs in a field and shot them. Somehow we would hear about what was happening in different parts of the combat zone. But we all decided that we were not going to take any prisoners anymore. There was a squad of Germans that were dug in behind a gate. They started waving a white flag to surrender. So I yelled at my guys to cease fire. They said, "You aren't going to let him get away with it, are you?" I said, "No, but let him wave the flag and when they get out on the open ground, then we can fire at them." So that was how we did. We would let them wave a white flag and come out, would yell for them to drop their rifles and guns, and they would drop them. And then I would fire first, and then the rest of my guys would fire and would kill them, and then move on until we came to the next place.
There you go. Okay. All right. Once again, William Farley, the filmmaker, and Bruce Jenkins, our moderator.
Okay, let me begin, and I hope I don't either come off too wonky or too much of the let's say the sort of history nerd. But Bill and I have a long history, and it goes back actually now 40 years this summer. 40 years ago at the Flaherty Film Seminar, we screened, and you'll see a poster to Bill's right shoulder called Citizen, which was his debut feature, which happened to have premiered, I believe, at the Sundance Film Festival that I also attended. I think that may have been where I saw it. But Melinda Ward and I had programmed the Flaherty Film Seminar in the summer of 1983, and we really wanted to put very, very centrally this feature film, Citizen, which is very much a kind of performance art film, partly because I think we recognized even back then the emergence of, let's call it, a new genre of experimental work. And it actually ended up being called the new talkie, right? Which meant in many ways that it privileged sound, language, and you might even say that unlike some experimental film, it actually had something to say. And I want to at least begin our conversation about this extraordinary new feature by asking Bill to talk a little bit about that first feature, about Citizen, and about really embracing language, embracing sound, and embracing stories, because that's really what absolutely fascinated us about Citizen.
Well, in the late 70s, early 80s, there were a lot of performance artists that had an extraordinary view of society, and clearly they were not part of the mainstream. But I had seen a lot of them, and one by one I approached them to ask if they'd be in this film. And what the thesis was, that these people who were disenfranchised were the wise ones. These people who were living on the street, who you came across, were the ones who told a version of the truth that was unique. And so that's how the film began. As the part of it I mentioned earlier to you, Bruce, is that when I was making the film, I thought I was making a film about anarchy, and I actually went to Boston to where Sacco and Vanzetti were imprisoned at one point. But after the film was done, a long time after the film was done, I realized the film wasn't about anarchy. The making of the film was anarchy. And so I followed these people and all these performers, and then wrote some scenes as bridges. But yeah, I've often thought that if I wasn't a filmmaker, I have a really great attachment to sound and to sound in general. I mean, I think people don't understand that effects tracks and the audio is such a profound impact on our experience. And so I was very much involved in that. And anytime I've had the chance, I've put sound that accommodates the visuals. And so that's how that came about. And it was quite a ride, and it did show quite a bit. What's ironic is 40 years later, the things that these people were saying, unfortunately, is still accurate. Their criticism of society, their view of what's going on with government. It's not old in relationship to content. The filmmaking is very crude. A lot of people shot, including myself. There was no money involved. And but it's an interesting chronicle of that time. And it's a good point, Bruce, that you noticed that I'm very attached to story. I'm very attached to content. And I wanted to be Man with a Gun. I was on a show that I got a commission to make a short film about a 83-year-old woman painter who did paintings of catastrophes of the 19th and 20th century. And in her studio, between setups, her husband told me these 3 horrific stories about World War II, him in World War II. And I took them in, but I couldn't get them out of my mind. They kept coming back. So finally, I mean, really a year went by, and I called the subject of the documentary and I said, Elaine, do you think your husband, Harold, would ever be interested in telling his stories about World War II on camera? And she said, he's been waiting his whole life to tell those stories on camera. So I recorded him once. I didn't know what the hell to do with it. It was way over the top for me. I just didn't, it was so violent and so extreme that I sat on the footage for quite a while until I was, for many years, I've been going to movies with Herbert Gold, the novelist, now 99 years old. And one of his close friends is Leo Lipwa. And I really like Leo, wonderful person. And just for the heck, without any purpose, I thought maybe I'm going to interview Leo, just kind of, I think Herb would like that. Because they're so close. And wow, Leo is a great storyteller. And so once again, he became the second part of the movie. And the third, once again, these people kind of appeared. Jim Mayer, a filmmaker in San Francisco recently had died a short time ago, said, I have a neighbor who's in his 90s and he's starting to talk about what happened to him, what he did in World War II, what happened to him. Maybe we should go out to lunch. And once again, Paul Michael was a fabulous storyteller. And all 3 of these men decided to entrust me with their legacy.
Well, I have to say, I've seen the entire cut of the film, and I've seen what we've just watched today 2 or 3 times. And I think there is such a strong through line, the centrality of language, the power of sound, of people simply telling their truth, right? As well as in I think even in this Zoom session where things get whatever a little wonky, your gift with archival footage, the extraordinary use of archival footage that captures the meaning of the words, they kind of are synced in very particular ways. It really feels like you kind of come full circle when I look at this work. I will also just say, and I'm so happy you kind of gave the explanation of why these 3, what grabbed you, because one would think, and I'll just say it straightforwardly, that as a experimental filmmaker, as someone who's part of the avant-garde. This seems like an unlikely subject, right? The Greatest Generation, World War II. Weren't we supposed to be anti-war? Weren't we supposed to be resistors? And yet you take this story, which you think we've seen 100 times. Isn't there Ken Burns out there doing something like this? And it seems so powerful and so new and so fresh.
One of the things I did that I discovered early on was I just let them talk. I didn't try to, you can morph, you can tighten up an interview by morphing imagery, and the audience might not know, but their struggle to try to say what they want to share was as important as what they did share. And so I recognized that early on. What also I did was, once I would transcribe one of the interviews, and the things that they said that I had provoked but did not have as a question, I asked the other two men. And so there's a level of continuity. I took the other part about it is my philosophical stand was I entered this as every man. I was in the army, I was drafted, but I was quite pleased that I did not seek combat, but I had the romance of war. I grew up in World War II films. I was totally submerged in the romance of war, of adventure, of danger, but I really didn't have the temperament I mean, I was never a fighter. I didn't like fighting, but I could at times talk myself out of getting beat up, or I had a great capacity for escaping. But however, the myth of the heroic male had always dominated my imagination, and I took a lot of wild jobs through my life and knew a lot of gangsters, and I did a lot of reckless things in pursuit of this kind of abstraction of a romance. And so this film allowed me to challenge the remnants of what romance I have in my imagination. And boy, did I need this. I think all of my films are some kind of personal therapy. I'm not embarrassed to say that, because two of these three men did terrible things. I could not judge them. I love these three men. In fact, at the end, I want to name some of the group. As we both know, films are collective. They're a collaboration, and I want to mention some of the principal people that helped me. But one of my friends, I was trying to, like with Harold, at certain points I was cutting Harold, and I was trying to protect him. When I say I cared about these three men, I mean it. I mean, and my friend said, "Hey, he told you one he wanted to share," and so having smart friends like that, who I got it once he said it, and so I just let them go. I didn't try to protect them. They wanted to share what they went through, and they are extraordinary people.
Yeah, I used the word callousness when I wrote you about having watched the film about Harold, because I was like, it is shocking. It is shocking because he's unrepentant. The other two have kind of pivot between you might say resignation and regret, but not Harold. We don't have a lot of time. I'm going to hold my phone up here. We only have really about 15 minutes, and I wanted to share the opportunity to speak with you and give responses to our colleagues who are attending the Zoom session. So Adam, if you want to, if there are questions or people who have raised their hand, I'm happy to share the moderation, share the commentary.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please type them in the chat or virtually raise your hand and we can call on you. Melvin McRae has a question. Melvin, can you?
Yes, I have.
There you
go. And that is, how closely did the archival footage match what the people were saying? And I understand the problem that you have. Obviously, there was no B camera team shooting the actual footage during these men's life experience. So you basically had to try to match what they were saying with archival footage. But you did a hell of a job. I mean, it looked
Thank you.
like
Thank
there
you.
was a B camera team actually there on the scene. But yeah, I just wondered what your process was. In that.
Probably,
congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't want to overestimate, but it would be not unreasonable to say I had put in thousands of hours looking at World War II footage. In fact, the making of this film, I spent more time in World War II than the Allies did fighting it. And I went to archives, the National Archives. Spielberg's got an amazing archives online. And so I went everywhere, and somehow I had memorized what these three men said. And when I was working on a scene, was looking at footage rather, I would remember something that might fit. And so I cut the film like a fiction film. So, we have one bunch of men shooting at a tank, and then someone running by the camera. I just made that as a narrative whenever I could, and not trying to illustrate, but rather I was more inclined to go towards the impressionistic feeling. And because it was challenging because there was a lot of funny things about the Signal Corps. I noticed very on that they stood behind. They didn't want to get shot. So there's a lot of footage of the back of soldiers' heads, but there's very little footage of soldiers coming towards you. I think the Russians and the Germans, they were, I don't know if they were braver, but they got more of the footage that you need to kind of create a narrative. But my idea was to have it impressionistic, and then at times to be kind of directly narrative. But I was blending the two with only obligation was whatever worked. If that answers, so a lot of time, and I would pull shots, and Richard, I would do the paper edit, and Richard Levine, the editor, I'd give him my paper edit, and his talent, his gifts would make decisions about whether they fit or not. And also he's a musician, so it was a wonderful double value for me, because he had a lyrical sense of both the cutting and the lyrical sense of it unfolding like music. So a lot of time on looking World War II footage.
One last question. Did you have an expert to check to make sure it was the right tank or the right unit, et cetera, et cetera?
I did my best. I'm sure a historian could kick my butt, but I did my best. Yeah, I know, like the Tiger tank. I spent a little time making sure it was the Tiger tank because it was so on point. But a lot of times I'm just winging it, and I'm hoping that the momentum of the storytelling will allow you not to notice whether I'm cheating a little bit. So I call it poetic license. Yeah.
Thank you
William,
so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, thanks so much, Melvin. William, I can actually illuminate a little bit about why European and Russian films have more faces in them, which is that they were more likely to be staged. The American army, just that staging was just the way that documentaries were made at the time. The expense of film, the need to shoot on tripods or still whenever possible, and all that just sort of required staging. But that the need was doubled or tripled in combat, where a camera looks a whole lot like a gun. Right. And so, like, if somebody was to stand up with a camera in the middle of a battlefield, it's not just that they were endangering themselves, but also everybody that they were filming. And so the Europeans were more likely to stage it, whereas the army just heard the word staging and they're like, what, you're going to do fake movies? No, absolutely not. And so the Americans kind of had to make do for the most part.
Well, I want to confess, John Huston staged some things, and I have a few of the shots in the movie. I hope you never notice. He did. He was naughty. And the other filmmakers, the other Hollywood filmmakers that were out there in combat were furious when they found out that he was staging some stuff. And I got a few of those shots. They were too good to pass up. But I'm confessing here. Not many, just a handful.
William, there's a lot of love for the film in the chat, and people are wondering what the plans are for the film. Can they, Bruce, you mentioned you've seen a full cut of it. Can people see that? Are you planning on releasing it, or what needs to be done before it can be released?
I'm showing the greatest patience I've ever had in my life, because I'm anxious to have this scene, and the scene in a movie theater would be very rewarding. I've had 2 sneak previews, very successful. But I'm being patient because, regrettably, the content of this movie is not going to get old. This is the disaster that war prevails, and the inhumanity of it is not going to go away. And there's really no good war. There's certainly wars that are justified, but I'm being patient. I want a theatrical run, and everybody, festivals have shown 6 or 8 of my past films didn't want to show this. The second act is Heart of Darkness. I go all the way until these 3 men, that even Leo, who never lost his humanity, but the other 2 guys got lost. They got lost in revenge. They got lost in a tribal feeling about the enemy. They started to see the enemy as not human beings. So it's been a great challenge. However, the audiences that have seen it thanked me, because what it does explain in the third act is that these 3 men, good men, honest men, innocent men, had to leave a part of themselves on the battlefield because they couldn't reintegrate the things they did in the war, and that affected their families, and it affects generations. The line that is that you hear the line, "Oh, my grandfather would never talk about it," or "My uncle would never talk about it." Well, that's epidemic with veterans. They can't talk about it. That's why they don't, but it closes down a part of their ability for intimacy. So it has generational effects. And so the third act of this movie explains in a way. I have one story. After a screening at the library, a guy emailed me. He said, "I was 16 years old, and my father was driving me to the airport to send me away to boarding school. He getting rid of his greatest problem in the world, me." He said, and I got out the door and I looked at my father, and he was crying. And this guy who wrote the email said, after seeing I Wanted to Be a Man with a Gun, I understood. I knew my father was in combat in World War II, but now I understood why he couldn't connect with me. And this is a great beginning of empathy, a great potential for healing, that we can forgive these people who endured this horror. And that's my secret purpose, only as a byproduct of making the film.
That's a very powerful answer. So how much is it completed then, or are you still finishing?
Bruce can attend to this. They're a black hole. They consume money. Everything you do, it's a lot of money. So yeah, the film is locked, but to get into distribution, I have to raise money, it's serious. So the economic end of it is that my final, I won't be stopped. And if it means that I do community screenings to veterans groups, to people who are interested in history, and I'm doing it in a YMCA or Oddfellows Hall. It doesn't matter. I'm on to take this movie out any way I can, regardless of how it's embraced by the culture. I know it works and I know it's a value. So yes, I need money. I'm not embarrassed to say it. It's a big project, and I worked on it for 4 or 5 years, and I never took any pay. And I'm not rich, but I've been faking it for years. Anyway, I'm in deep, and I'll get, it'll get out. But I sure would like help anyone who sees its potential.
And people can go to your website, farleyfilm.com, to get
There's a donate
to
button.
get updates and also to donate to get this
And
out
it's a
there.
501c3. So instead of paying the government, you can help this film get launched.
I think that there's going to be a lot of grassroots support for this film. I think if you do end up distributing this yourself, you will find a lot of people who want to screen it. I can understand why festival programmers or TV executives might blanch a little bit, because it looks, the documentary, the visuals, it looks like it's your just sort of customary, like sepia toned, sort of nostalgic History Channel documentary about World War II. But the more you listen to the men, it keeps going deeper and deeper and going to places that those documentaries never go. And the thing is, just watching it, but also, you know, hearing you talk about the screenings that you've had, it seems like this is something that people really appreciate. They want to have this conversation. They want to see this version of the record that rarely ever gets acknowledged.
And the third act, which is not represented in this 25 minutes. The film is running 80-something minutes. The third act is, you see their relatives, the 3 men's relatives, are Herbert Gold, Leo's best friend. You see the relatives, and you see how their heart has been injured by what these 3 men couldn't share. That's the third act, and it brings it home. It brings it home. They could only tell you so much about how they felt. They could tell you about combat, but they also are very articulate about coming home. But the pain is really shared by the ones that loved them.
And I'm just going to pick up very briefly on what Adam was saying. I think that you could say, oh, it's a talking heads film. But in actuality, you have to remember, Bill Farley's a Bay Area experimental filmmaker, right? He's in the same community that, say, Bruce Conner was in, or Bruce Bailey was in. There is in its DNA something quite experimental. And there is in its use of archival footage something remarkable that we can see, you know, tracing back to Bruce Conner's work and moving forward in, you know, a new direction. So there is something very much of a piece with an experimental practice that is, you know, what makes this different. And I have to say, I think Melvin, you know, was right onto it. It's, you know, you begin to say that footage, it's what you do with the footage. And it's not, as you say, illustrative. It has its own life, right? It has its own, you know, it has its own political, sociological, cultural affect. And it's a film that's really full of affect. That's what's so powerful for me. And it's not to say that, you know, when Ken Burns does it, it's soulless, but this has a deep soul that is very much unlike any other World War II documentary I've ever seen. So I think that's what's going to be its lasting impact.
Thank you for that. I love these 3 men, and I wouldn't do anything to hurt them or hinder them. Yeah, and that love is in the movie. I wonder if I can hold on one second. I want to show you something. Bruce Conner. As a friend of mine, and I called him up, and I think he said, "Yeah, I'll give you." You know, it's a limited edition. He said, "Yeah, $117."
Beautiful.
Well, I think that with the call for applause, that's a good place to end it.
Could
I want to thank.
Could I get a quick thank you to just, this is a collaboration. May I take a minute?
Oh, yes, of course, please.
I just want to thank on screen my producers Herbert Gold and Douglas Hollis, the editor Richard Levine, music by Beth Custer, and the colleagues, just a handful of the colleagues that helped shape this movie: Adam Kecker, Richard Levine again, Rick Schmidt, Tom Schlesinger, Kevin White, and Filmmakers Collaborative SF, which is the financial sponsors of this film. And finally, I just want to thank Media Burn, Adam Hard and Sarah Chapman, Tom Weisberg, and Star Sutherland, who told you guys about my film. I'm very, very grateful. Very grateful.
We're absolutely thrilled to have you. Yeah, we can end it there, everybody. For updates, farleyfilm.com. Thank you so much for sharing this extraordinary
Bruce, thank you so
work with
much.
us.
Bruce,
Thank you, Bruce.
Appreciate it very much.
All right, everybody, have a wonderful night, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.